Thanks. That's a big question.
It's loaded.
It's very loaded. Let me just set some context by saying that Barbados is a small island in the Caribbean, population of 270,000 about and declining, which is another of the existential threats that we're facing: falling population and aging population. But Barbados has always had, since independence, a history of stable, free, and fair elections and a high degree of political stability. I think it's important to set that context because, the circumstances in which we are talking about these issues of maintaining democracy and democratic participation are against the backdrop of expectations of stability and truth. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we have in Barbados is extremely high internet and digital penetration. Mm-hmm. So you'll see our numbers say something like 114% mobile penetration. So we are kind of over the maximum, right? People have very immediate access to information and high expectations about that information. So then the question becomes about not just access, but meaningful access and use as we talk about these issues. Just before I got on a plane to come here, the Office of the Prime Minister in Barbados had to push out urgently warnings about a deep fake that had just been circulating. And I want to share the example because it highlights not just the domestic issues when it comes to democratic participation and trust, but also the potential risk to destabilize global relations, international relations, and foreign policy. Mm. The deep fake was about the Prime Minister saying something in relation to another major world power and saying untruthfully that Barbados was taking a certain diplomatic stance with respect to this country. Now that has the potential to completely, especially in this current global political environment, to completely put at risk a lot of what a country is doing with respect to policy and global engagement. So we're not just talking about domestic trust, but we're talking about international and a country's global position in the world. And so I wanted to say a little bit in answer to your question about what we're doing. One of the things I think is very important is this issue of democratic literacy. Mm. How do people interact with policy conversations, with electoral processes? So one example, one of the things that we've tried to do simply is to push out as much truth and transparency as we can. Mm-hmm. Start to get people accustomed to an environment of truth and evidence, because that, even before we started talking about technology, is perhaps something that hasn't been as strong as we would like. So, for example, we have these joint select committees of Parliament that consider issues before they're passed, consider legislation that have to do with governance, with social issues, and so on, and they're broadcast. There are very few things that the Prime Minister says, speeches, engagements, that are not broadcast either in real time or recorded and shared. And why? Because we want to be able to get people used to the idea of truth. This is the original source, and this is where you can find it. You can find it on these channels, you can find it in these ways. The other thing that we're working on is investing in a tech ecosystem that can balance or build tools that essentially fight against misinformation. Mm-hmm. So that there are others who are investing very heavily in misinformation. What can we do to invest in creators, tech creators, who are going to combat that with things that promote truth? One of the things, though, that we think is very important is encouraging platforms to return to more robust methods of verification. Mm. We think that that is critical. And I'll say very quickly, I think it was Rebecca who said earlier that political speech is very protected in general in your jurisdiction. The interesting thing is that while political speech is protected and while, I can sit in one jurisdiction in a country like Barbados, and see things proliferating about political actors in my space. On the other hand, as a political actor on a social media platform sitting in Barbados, I am not trusted to generate content. And so as soon as I try to generate content as a politician, I'm told, well, actually, you're a politician, and we're not sure that you should be able to say these things on our platform. So the question of being able to combat misinformation is also, I'm also constrained because of some of the rules that platforms that are generated in other parts of the world but impact the way I can talk to my constituents, the way that they operate. So I think that these are some of the ways that we've started to really try and encourage an environment of real evidence and truth. There is legislation. I was the minister who brought cybercrime legislation. We took it to the Joint Select Committee. We heard evidence, we heard pushback, we heard concerns on human rights from citizens, and we amended the legislation. And so I think that this is a healthy way to get people in the conversation and make sure that we realize that democratic participation and adherence to truth and evidence is everybody's concern. Creating this culture of evidence so that people feel that, okay, should I propagate something if I cannot show that it is true? I think that is something that has certainly helped. But also investing in the kind of learning, certainly in countries in global majority countries, investing in the kind of learning that will allow our people to create tools that they find useful and that they generate and are able themselves to trust. One of the ways in Barbados that we started when I was Minister of Technology is to be able to train people in things like data analytics and data science. And this is not just in formal academic institutions, but partnering with companies. There's one, for example, that does a lot of work on the continent of Africa called Zindi that we're working with so that people can learn some of these skills and be able to create tools and play in that space. We think that there's an AI value chain, which means that for some countries in the global majority, it may not be practical to say we are going to build these large language models, but we can create at some part of that value chain and start to create some of these technology tools. So I do think that the culture of evidence to support strong legislation and establishing sources of truth that people see that they can trust is a part of the puzzle as well. Really, this is about intent. The last question, how can you differentiate the origin of an idea or a certain set of information? And I think it is less about origin and more about output. That's going to be what we end up having to regulate and legislate, because it is going to be very difficult to say, just like often we don't know now, we can't see the author behind something. We may be able to eventually verify, but that takes time, and more people are very impatient when it comes to information. But I think one of the things that we're going to have to concern ourselves with is really verification of what is generated, and as well as being able to tell where it was generated from. So to be able to require that we can see that this particular output used AI, but also to be able to use different pieces of legislation to generate output. So for example, we've seen cases recently where there was coercion used to get young people to do certain things, and this came from an AI actor. And what that jurisdiction, I don't want to mention which country it was in, but what that jurisdiction ended up having to start to look at is, well, what is the kind of content, no matter the source, that can make its way into this space where vulnerable people are represented? And to start to use kinds of keyword technology and authentication technology to say, look, because this content has come into this space, it cannot be allowed here because of the nature of the people who are here, whether they're young people and children and so on. So I think that, as you say, it's going to be very difficult more and more to kind of police the difference between the two. But I think identifying the origin and then regulating or being able to direct the content and the outcome is going to be more and more the kind of work that we're going to have to do. Thank you. You know, to the brother from Kenya who just spoke, this is deja vu all over again, as they say. I worked for many years on climate justice and still am. And this is really a kind of a repeat of that conversation, right? That we saw the dumping, in this case, of greenhouse gas emissions. We experienced it, we suffered from it, and then we started to slowly try to regulate a global system that would see, you know, the polluting countries start to invest in adaptation and mitigation, and it's been a long, arduous process that is not settled. And so for me, we have to learn the lessons of nuclear regulation. We have to learn the lessons of climate that we're still experiencing now, and to be able to say, look, these are the things that we require of major tech countries and major tech companies. For example, you'll see that major social network companies and creators can benefit hugely. They don't even have to physically come to a country and collect data, but they can benefit hugely just from pushing information into a jurisdiction where there is little control. So I agree with you. I cannot speak to whether IGF is that place, but I do think that we have to learn the lessons of the last 3 decades in climate and in other areas, and rather than having it take another 3 decades to come to a global compact that is about accountability, that needs to happen now. We already have models for it. We already know what that looks like, and it's just time to act in a global way.